favorite radio station.
This is Afro Vibes Radio Houston.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Convergence. It is a great Monday to be alive, and I am so ecstatic to be here in the studio with Honorable Teta Banks with the United Nations Association. Today is a special day with the United Nations, and we're going to talk about that and a lot more. But I do want to just start out, before I get started, reminding everyone that Windsor Village Church is having, the CEO ministry is having a marketplace fair on December 16th. But also, if you're a business owner and you would like to attend the symposium, there's a free symposium. Go to kingdombuilders.com or go to eventbrite.com and register for that symposium. They're going to have a lot of great workshops for business owners. So I will post some information about that later. But I want to delay no further, because I have the Honorable Teta Banks here in the studio with us at Afro Vibes Radio, and I am so excited. We've had an opportunity to cross paths numerous times in my professional career, and this is the first time having you in the radio station at Afro Vibes on Convergence with Marina. So thank you for joining. And Teta, Honorable Teta, tell people who you are. You know, how did you get involved with the United Nations Association?
Oh, well, it's sort of a circular journey. I joined the United Nations Association when I lived in Philadelphia.
Okay.
However, going all the way back to high school, I was part of the Model United Nations program
Okay.
at my high school.
Oh, wow.
And even before then, the United Nations were very instrumental in terms of helping Liberia at the time when I was a child, and that's where I was born.
Mm-hmm.
So my beginnings were based upon the assistance of the United Nations in terms of helping children overseas through the UNICEF and other programs. And then, of course, when I got appointed as Honorary Consul General of Liberia in Philadelphia, there was a wonderful United Nations Association group there in Philadelphia, and they had been well established, and and they continue to do fantastic work. So I became very much involved with them, and then that has continued whatever city I've lived in.
Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, you just started out from high school. You never think that
I had forgotten. I had forgotten that, because as we talk to young people, we focus and we encourage them to participate in our Model United Nations and our global classrooms. And we had a reunion a few years ago, and we were going through the yearbook, and there was a picture of our Model United Nations team.
Wow.
From the Detroit High School, yes.
Wow, so you never know what you get your children involved in, how that can impact their lives later on. That is fantastic.
And what we found is that many of our leaders in international affairs have come through Model United Nations, whether it was at the collegiate level or whether it was at the high school level.
Wow. You know, for many people, they may not know exactly what it is. I know about it from my school, but it's a simulated, a simulation of the United Nations, but you do it in the high school level. So people take on, or the students take on different roles as different leaders, and
right, and the teams can represent countries. We now have it at the middle school, the high school, and then the collegiate level.
Awesome.
And not only do these programs operate within a school and within a school district and within a city, but also nationally and internationally.
Yes.
So that students from different states can go and attend the session in New York, and then representatives from different countries, collegiate countries, collegiate institutions and countries, and also high schools in other countries also come to the United Nations actually, and are able to be in the headquarters there.
Wow, that is really awesome. That is awesome. We have people who are listening to us today from Nigeria, chiming in, and all over the world, and we're so excited.
Well, in fact, we just had our World Federation of United Nations Association, and I think, and if I could just tell you a little bit about what the United Nations Association was started soon after the chartering of the United Nations. So the United Nations was chartered on October 24th, 1945, and 46, and then soon after we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which we're going to be celebrating and talking about today. But Eleanor Roosevelt and a group of internationalists, we'll call them, felt that the United Nations needed support from the groundswell of people, of the citizens, and she
Right.
called it civic action, citizen
Yes.
action. And so her, one of her focal points was to go around to all of the U.S. states and establish these associations. And now it has spread in many of our countries. We have about 120 to 30 countries that have United Nations associations. So many of the listeners have UNAs in their countries.
Yes.
And we just last month, 2 months ago, had the World Federation of UNA plenary session, and that was held in the Dominican Republic. And we had over 50 countries represented. And then our next session is going to be in the country of Georgia. And so every 3 years we have that session, and countries with their representatives come, and we discuss the impact that our UNAs are making in our countries.
Oh, wonderful. So, I mean, there's a lot going on behind the scenes that a lot of people are not even aware of. So thank you for sharing. So today you mentioned is a special day. It's a Human Rights Day. Can you tell us a little bit more? What is this Human Rights Day?
As I said, soon after the United Nations was chartered, there came a need to have standards, universal standards that all countries would agree to in terms of what are the rights of just human beings. And so there was adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and it was signed off on December 10th.
Today?
Yes, in 1948. So we are celebrating the 70th year of the UNDHR, we call it,
Wow.
Universal Declaration. Now, why that's important is because when we look at what those rights are, many of the issues that we're facing worldwide, and even, including the U.S.,
Yes.
some of those rights are being violated.
Yes.
And so when we say, okay, well, I look at the clean water issue in Flint, Michigan,
Right.
or we look at pollution by companies in Nigeria
Right.
that are drilling, things like that. Those things are covered under the Universal Declaration, that the people in those countries, wherever one lives, has these rights of having clean environment. They have the right of liberty. They have a right to choose where they want to live. Included in that also is that children have the right to not be separated from their families.
Oh, that's a big issue
Yes,
right now.
yes,
Yes,
yes.
absolutely.
Yes, yes. And so when we talk about what are these rights, they are covered in the Universal Declaration, and it's a matter of people knowing about these rights and then advocating, for the
Okay.
protection of the rights. And I just sort of tell people, look, there are more good people than other people in the world.
Absolutely.
But if we remain silent, then those things that we don't like to see will continue, without opposition.
So what are some ways that people can advocate, just, a common person like myself, or many of our listeners who are not entrenched in the political systems?
Certainly, we can do letter writing or calling in our case, our congressional leaders. On the UNA USA, we have already templates or letters, and all you have to do is sign it, and it goes to your congressperson.
Oh, okay.
Saying that we want to sign this petition and a resolution. In fact, there's a resolution pending that we reinforce the Human Rights Declaration in specific areas. In other countries, you can raise the issue that those countries have signed on to the United Nations Declaration, and that they should be upheld.
Right.
In some cases, some of the violations have reached the level of being able to be submitted to the United Nations as violations.
Right.
Yeah. What happened with the Flint, Michigan situation is that the people there knew about the Declaration of Human Rights, and they petitioned and sent a letter to the United Nations, the Human Rights Commission, and said this needs to be investigated on that level.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow, so you can go beyond just the United States government. You've got the United Nations at hand to reach out to. For those of you joining us, I am in the studio today with Honorable Teta Banks from the United Nations Association. She has played a role with the United Nations for a number of years, and she's here to talk about Human Rights Days and also how does the United Nations Association partner with the United Nations and other governments and help make change or help bring awareness for human rights issues. So I just wanted to make sure that you are here and you understand what we're talking about, because I have such a fabulous guest on today. So we were talking about some of the background with the Human Rights Day that it started with Eleanor Roosevelt back in the early 1940s. 48. Yeah. So, and we're celebrating the 70th day. So you are here, 70th year, not 70th day, 70th year of the Human Rights Declaration. So we are excited, and so many of you are probably out there wondering, what exactly does the United Nations Association do? How does it come into the branch of the United Nations? And so I'd love for you to, share a little bit, so that way we can give the backdrop before we go further into some of the other more pressing issues that are before us.
Well, the United Nations and United Nations Association are two separate entities. The United Nations Association, its major focus is to advocate for the United Nations, and we are the only organization whose sole purpose is to forward the mission and the programs and the issues and the stance of the United Nations. The United Nations, of course, is the representative organization of nations, and they have a representative there. But outside of that, how then do everyday people and the population, how do they participate in that? And this is what the UNA, United Nations Association, offers in any country. And as I said, most countries have a United Nations Association.
Right.
So if people are interested in, participating that way. Initially, when Mrs. Roosevelt went around establishing the UNAs, it was for education purposes. Many people didn't know about the United Nations and what its reach was, what the programs were. So the United Nations has a family of operations. So when you hear about UNICEF, that takes care of the Children's Educational Fund, or UNESCO, the Education and Science portion, or the World Health Organization, or other entities like that. All of those come under, we call it the family of the United Nations.
Okay.
And so those areas are programmed to, they analyze, they can assess, they can provide assistance to nations in those particular areas. So that's what the UN does. And they have staffing. And then UNA, these are, any person can become a member. You join the UNA in your area or in your country, and then you can participate in any of those programs with UNICEF and promote UNICEF, for instance, or promote UNESCO. But also, outside of educating people about what the UN does, we're now in the next phase of it, which is even more critical, is the advocacy.
Okay.
Because their forces are put to get rid of the UN, to say, well, no, it's this world power that wants to take over our country, and that is not the case. It's to ensure that countries do continue to provide liberty and do continue to provide human rights for its citizens. So if there is a friendly hand out there for countries that believe that they're in turmoil or that they believe that their rights are being violated, there is a body that they can turn to. And those types of petitions come from a nation, to the UN. But also the UNA members can advocate, within their own congressional or legislative bodies or their administrative governmental bodies, and as well as sponsor programs on their own. In the USA, that's why we have UNA USA.
Right.
This is our national one. We have certain areas that we focus on for advocacy, and then we also have programs that our chapters do.
Oh, okay. Well, we're going to take a short break and we're going to learn a little bit more about some of the programs that are here in the Houston area in the United States, as well as maybe some of the other ways that people can participate, as well as talk about more human rights issues that are before us. Stay with us. We'll be right back on Convergence with Marina.
You can listen to Afro Vibes Radio from anywhere around the world. Simply download our app from the Apple or Google Play Store. You can also listen via TuneIn app or visit our website at afrovibesradio.com and listen live.
So we're back on Convergence and we're talking with Honorable Teta Banks of the United Nations Association. And again, thank you again for being here. And today is our special day, 70 years of the United Nations Association celebrating Human Rights Day. So as we're talking about human rights, what are nations required to do in regards to human rights?
Oh, there are 30 articles that constitute the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And so even if you just Google it, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, you will see all of those.
Mm-hmm.
Basic ones being, as I mentioned, liberty,
Mm-hmm.
the freedom to be a citizen of
Okay.
a nation, protection against violence, the freedom to travel and to move, and the whole thing of, life, liberty, those types of things. And it echoes a lot of the U.S. Declaration, of course, and then it also echoes many of those documents that were in countries where democracies, especially,
Right.
were established. But it also takes care of and addresses issues of imprisonment,
Yeah.
issues of child and family issues that we're dealing with, especially in the U.S. with border issues, and those countries that are dealing with the refugee issues.
Mm-hmm.
So it covers those. That's why there's so much criticism against countries that are not welcoming
Right.
refugees or
Right.
are criminalizing them because
Yeah.
they're violations.
Okay.
And then it also deals with environmental types of issues. We have now environmental justice issues. Now, what does that mean? It means that there are areas that have so much pollution,
Yeah.
and it's infecting the environment, and that environment then infuses into the citizens and affects
Correct.
them mentally and physically. And it's done generally against certain populations. You
Yeah.
can see. So in Houston, we have that down near the port area.
Yeah.
And we do have activist groups here in Houston that address that.
Okay.
But I think there were a couple of comments that had come in on the Facebook. You can get information on your particular country if you're trying to contact your UNA in your country, whether it's Nigeria, whether it's Haiti, wherever. If you go to, it's the World Federation of United Nations Association, but we say WFUNA, WFUNA.org.
Okay, so I'm going to put that down here. WFUNA.
WFUNA.org. Now, WFUNA is the World Federation of United Nations Associations. And what happens when you go on that website, you can select your country and you will see the contact person or the president of that nation's UNA and be able to get in touch with them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then for the USA, whatever state you're in or whatever city you're in, especially by states, you can get that through UNAUSA.org.
Okay.
So if you go to that one, UNAUSA, USA.org,
.org.
and then if you go into membership, you'll be asked what state are you looking for, and then you will have the chapters that are available in that state.
Excellent, excellent. I know that there are a lot of concerns about human trafficking, whether it's sex trafficking, there's the human trafficking is so large, labor trafficking. I just was listening recently to information about polygamous marriages and children, being taken in to be the bride of
child marriages.
Child marriages. I mean, just so sad. I mean, that a lot of these children or the people don't have their choice, as to how they're to live in a free society. So it's just basically taken away with them.
Well, Yeah, the human trafficking issue we have addressed, UNA has addressed, and the World Federation has addressed also. I was invited to the Secretary General's special session on human trafficking last year to represent the U.S. We had 100 people selected worldwide to go. And so what I reported on and shared with the body was what we were doing in the USA.
Okay.
And as I mentioned at our UN Day event, Texas is at the head of that, especially through the efforts of Representative Thompson.
Yes.
In terms of making human trafficking, not criminalizing the victim,
Right.
and then providing protection for women and then also children. And so recently at the World Federation plenary, the UNA USA submitted one of the resolutions about human trafficking. And what we found both at the Secretary General's special session was that the countries weren't communicating with each other.
Really?
So their systems weren't in sync with each other to share information. So if someone was human trafficking in Thailand, we didn't have a database here that was readily available. So what we did at the World Federation was to promote the sharing of data, a data sharing system,
Okay.
so that we can track it and then share that information among countries and be able to arrest and prosecute.
So that's in effect right now?
That we've submitted that to the United Nations.
Oh, excellent. Because it's not just state to state, it's from country to country to the state, then to the next state where they, traffic people. So this is excellent. That's a whole project in itself. You need help here in the United Nations Association because you're a nonprofit.
We're a nonprofit and we operate by volunteers primarily. Most of our chapters operate by volunteers. We have few chapters that do have staffing. Our offices are in Washington and New York, and there are staffs there. The United Nations Association USA is now part of the United Nations Foundation. And so the United Nations Foundation has programs such as Nothing But Nets, which is our anti-malaria. The number one killer of children in sub-Saharan Africa is malaria.
Yeah.
And so we are promoting that program. And it's great for kids to get involved in service learning through that way. And that means that they can raise $10, and they get to see the data and everything. But $10 can buy a bed net that has the anti-malaria serum in it that kills those mosquitoes. And that one bed net can save a family of 4.
Wow.
So here we have, elementary kids who are excited about saying, wow, I can help save some lives, and this is a good way to do it. And then we have the NBA, National Basketball Association, which teamed up with us. That's why we call it Nothing But Nets.
Okay.
From the basketball term.
Yeah.
So there are ways that we help humanitarian assistance
Yeah.
in many of those ways.
So-
We have Shot at Life. Many people have seen that at the Walgreens. We partner with Walgreens.
Okay.
So when you go in or pay for a vaccination, it also pays for vaccinations of children in other places that don't have the means.
Oh, that's excellent. So if someone wanted to donate for the Nothing But the Nets program, because that's the one that you are actually taking in, the one with Walgreens is basically a matching program with Walgreens. So how can people contact you to make a donation?
For Nothing But Nets, you can go straight into nothingbutnets.net.
Okay.
You
Okay.
can even set up your own team,
Okay.
set up your goal, get friends of yours to contribute to that, and that's a direct.
For $10, you can save a family's life from malaria. That's incredible. I wanted to ask you about, I think we touched on it, what human rights issues do we have internationally and nationally? And we talked about a few of them, but if you want to, speak a little bit more about that, I'd love for you to share that with our audience.
At the top of the list, both politically and numbers-wise, of course, we have the world refugee issue.
Okay.
This is the most critical refugee issue we have had since World War II. The majority of the refugees are children. And so we're talking over about, it's over 100,000
Yeah.
that have come into our areas. And then if we look globally, it's in the millions.
Okay.
So the refugee issue that came out of Yemen and that area has to do with genocide, war, things like that.
Mhm.
And so countries have agreed to take in certain numbers. So, that's where we are with that part. The refugee issue coming with the border, the Latin American and South American border issue, that's not really part of the general refugee issue that we were talking about.
Right.
But again, it comes out of war and violence in those and protection. And so by our Constitution, by our laws, in terms of U.S., people are allowed to come here for asylum and then go through the process.
Right.
So that's a much different issue. And what's interesting is we talk about immigration and refugee. Certainly the general term of immigration, anyone coming in. But in just a regular immigrant versus a refugee, there are different ways of that. Generally, when families have decided to come to America, they have prepared, they've gotten all the closing of wherever they are. They've looked at America and said, okay, this is what I want to do. And so there's a long time frame in there of preparation.
Right.
Okay. And most early on, outside of the refugee issue, that's what were the immigrants. Okay. So that was not a problem. Okay. Outside of there have always been discriminatory practices within the immigration, the U.S. immigration policy of how many to let from this country, that country, to sort of regulate and monitor the balance of numbers, and especially the numbers of people of color.
Right.
So we have to understand that
It's a whole
discriminatory system has always been
Yeah.
there, and we've tried to address that in many ways. But refugees are those that they will come immediately, they leave everything, they don't have anything, and so it presents another layer in that whole immigration process. But anyway, so the world refugee crisis is what is at the top of the list in terms, because it's not only the people that are leaving the country, but those countries that they're going into, and do those countries have the wherewithal, to take care of them. Part of our U.S. policies now in terms of refugees is that we have many citizens here of other countries who have been here on asylum, and we call it temporary borders. The current White House administration now is putting an end date and forcing them to return to their countries. Okay, so that's affecting Liberia, it's affecting some of the Caribbean countries, it's affecting Sudan, it's affecting other areas of Africa. Now what that means is, if we're just talking about Liberia, we're talking about almost 10,000 people in the U.S. that they were supposed to have left in March. So they've gotten a 1-year extension. Now keep in mind that since the beginning of the Liberian Civil War, that was like 1980, so you have 3 generations, at least, of Liberians who have been here. And there were 3 waves of the Civil War. So people came at different times. So what the current administration, White House administration, is saying is that next March, those who came here on asylum must return to Liberia. Okay, so it's a problem here in terms of splitting families.
Right.
It's also a problem for Liberia.
Right.
They're not prepared for this influx of people. Shorted housing is not there, jobs are not there. Transportation, how are they going to get back there?
Right.
And so it's presenting problems with both sides, or both countries that are involved in these types of situations. Okay, so that's the refugee. Of course, we talked about human trafficking. Okay, gender equality and gender protection, and we talked about child marriages.
Yes.
We see that in the African countries. We see it in India, some of the Mid-Eastern, some of the Asian areas. So there are regulations, and again, under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and child protection stuff, that we're addressing the child marriage portion. Now, we know that part of this is a cultural difference, but when you talk about safety and you talk about liberty, then that is where this falls under.
Yeah.
And of course, then we also have just racial discrimination and genocide. Racial or religious, I'd put the two together. because it spans both of those, racial and religious genocide as well as persecution.
Mm-hmm.
So we have that. I mean, we have a lot of problems.
So, I mean, you can't solve everything, but you're trying to really reach out.
And one of the key documents, while we're celebrating the 70th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, what we have that has come after that declaration, but the declaration is the basis of it.
Right.
We now have what we call global goals.
Yes.
Now, global goals, they're technically the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 areas.
Okay.
And what that does, all countries in the UN membership signed on to these. Okay, and they said we will affect these areas. These are the goals, meaning there's a percentage. We want to reduce poverty this amount.
Right.
We want to increase access to education for girls this amount. So there are numerical goals in all of these areas now, which is a stronger document because it can be measured.
Right.
Compared to the Universal Declaration. So again, the Universal Declaration is the basis. And these Sustainable Development Goals that we have now, that's what the countries have signed on to. So they're obligated to those. And that's a real strong point for countries to realize.
Wow, that's good. So now, what is the hope for the future of improving human rights? Because here we are, we're at this benchmark, 70 years, this milestone, and we've seen a lot of great things that the United Nations associations and the United Nations have done. But there's so much, as you know, we have even some of our Facebook folks who writing in, I need help. What, what is the hope for the future, and what can be done, and how can, again, share with people how can they help make effective change?
There has to always be an air of hope. So I told someone, they said, well, how's the UNA doing? I said, well, there's good news and bad news. Okay, so the good news is we have more people interested in what we're doing. We have more people talking about the United Nations. We have more people wanting to be a part of the United Nations Association. The bad news is the reason. And the reason is there's a greater need.
Right.
Okay. So after World War II, when the United Nations was established, its focus was to avoid World War III, the scourge of war. That was its major focus. Now we have so many areas of human rights violations that we have the global goals now trying to address those things and all. But another part of the good news is that we have identified those areas so that people can select what areas, do we see, and how do we define this problem that we see in our country, and then be able to address it that way. And certainly to speak out and be an advocate. Join organizations, even in addition to the UNA. But we have a lot of human rights organizations that are working on these. You have community groups, you have faith-based organizations that are working on these, and then become a part of it. One of our leaders once said, either you're part of the problem or you're part of the solution. So you can't just sit back and say, woe is me. We have to be able to take a stand and use our organizations, use our institutions, use our communities to address these.
Okay. Well, thank you. So how can individuals find out more about you, or how can they get involved? Where should they go? Website or phone number?
For the UNA USA, they can go to unausa.org, and those are all of the programs for the U.S. And,
okay.
For Texas, you can just click the drop downs for each of our states.
Okay.
For our other countries, go to WFUNA, WFUNA.org, World Federation of UNA, and you can identify the UNA in your country. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for being our guest here on Afro Vibes Radio. For those of you who are listening in via the www.afrovibesradio.com, or you can go and download our Afro Vibes Radio app on the Google Play or the App Store. definitely connect with me, Marina Angelica Coriat, or Marina A. Coriat on Facebook, and Refined Communications on the Instagram. Definitely want to see you or talk with you every Monday, and we'll be doing another show with Honorable Teta Banks because there's so much information to share. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us, and we'll talk with you next Monday. God bless.
Afro Vibes Radio, the #1 online radio station on the net, reaching over 177 countries around the world.